there's this whole wave of writers who are leaving their publications, and that's really good for writers. You can make more money, you have a lot more creative freedom, a lot more control over what you do, but there's a lot of downsides to that. So one is it's like really lonely. Two is there's only a certain kind of writing you can do when you're by yourself because you have to produce a certain amount a week in order to just build your
I
audience.
feel like you're telling me why my job is bad right
Yeah.
Welcome to the General Podcast, the show where there's no host, no script, just the best builders talking about what they do and why they do it.
I've just been watching you from afar in a non-creepy way. And you just seem really talented, and I've always wanted to get to know you. So I sort of jumped at a chance to get to chat.
For me, this is really cool because I remember talking to friends in media years and years ago, even pre-COVID, about wouldn't it be fun to do some sort of media collective, something like that. And so then we were sort of like, oh, Every is just that.
Mm-hmm.
But you've evolved since then, and now I follow you for how to use AI tools, kind of where the puck is going with AI and media.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel way out of my depth, but I feel like just following you and what you're building is like a cheat sheet for me about how far behind I am there. So it was a delightful opportunity for me to just learn from you for an hour.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love to hear that because that's exactly like how we're trying to position the coverage that we do. And so that it's coming through means a lot. Yeah.
Well, it is interesting. You know, we come from very different backgrounds. You obviously did a startup before this. I'd say you have more of that coder background, whereas I really have a media and Indiana Jones attempted career background. So very different. Happy to explain that.
I would love to know what that means.
Yeah. But, well, for me, it was basically that in college, I thought I should just create a major around being Indiana Jones until I realized that person today would just go to jail immediately. And so not a great career option, but I did do Latin, archaeology, medieval history, all the useful stuff for covering AI, you know? So,
did you go on any adventures?
I dug up Harvard Yard,
Okay.
which was great because tourists would come and try to fall into this pit that we were digging to find the oldest, like, knockdown building at Harvard from 300 years ago, which we did, which was cool. And I also went to the Middle East, to Egypt, and was trying to go to Syria right as the Arab Spring was starting.
Okay.
And so it was not a very safe time.
Yeah.
And that was also part of my contribution to maybe I should career pivot.
Yeah.
But yeah, very, very unusual backgrounds, I think, get into AI. I'd say you come from much more that classical tech background.
Yeah.
How did your journey take you from like startups to a difficult area like media?
I've really always loved writing, and I started out wanting to be a writer. So when I was in third grade, like I was like, I'm gonna be a writer. I wrote a novel, a 100-page novel. Which I was.
What was the subject?
I have no
novel?
idea. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think it had a subject.
That's kind of it's very modernist.
Yeah. My mom still has it, but I was very focused on having it be 100 pages. That was like the mark of a real book for me. And then I decided that I didn't have enough life experience to be a writer at that point. And so I needed to go out and have more experience before I could go back to writing. So in fifth grade, I read a Bill Gates biography and decided I wanted to start Microsoft or a Microsoft competitor. I was going to name it Megasoft.
Nice.
And that's how I started learning to code. And so like programming and business and tech and then writing have always been these like sort of dual threads for me.
Were you like a super cool kid in high school?
I was extremely cool. Can't tell.
Yeah. So was I, obviously.
Super popular. And no, I felt kind of like I was always off to the side a little bit. So I channeled my not being cool enough into working really hard. And that was actually good. It required a lot of therapy to like change that approach to things, but for the first like 15 years of my life, from 10 to whatever 25, it was very useful.
And then when did you become like an actual entrepreneur versus Bill Gates's next competitor?
So I started building like lots of little apps in high school. I was really into making BlackBerry apps. This is before the iPhone came out, so I was like,
I was Team BlackBerry.
Really? Yeah. Did you have a BlackBerry Pearl?
I did.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was building stuff for BlackBerry Pearl.
Nice.
And that's basically how I paid for gas and food in high school, is just like selling apps on the internet. And then in college, I was a philosophy major, but I started this company called Firefly, which ran that for a couple years. It was all bootstrapped, and then sold it to this company called Pega. It's a big public enterprise software company. Right as I graduated, and so that was the first thing I did that turned into a real company, had real customers, we had employees, all that kind of stuff.
That's cool. Meanwhile, in college, I was a arbitrage of a startup. I kind of blocked this out of my memory, and I forget that this happened a lot of times, but I actually did work for a startup in college, and it was a test prep company, kind of a multi-level marketing scheme.
Okay.
The founder...
Who among us has not worked for a multi-level marketing scheme at some
The
point?
amazing thing is it actually got acquired, and the founder did well, and then later co-founded Thrive Market, which is like a real venture-backed commerce startup. But he got his start. Their arbitrage was they went to Ivy League college students, and they convinced them to be like regional managers of this test prep company, where the students would have to basically put together a curriculum, find a classroom, do all this work to do SAT tutoring, and then take home maybe 10%. And the startup took the vast majority of the money. And so I worked on this for 2 summers, and I thought I was making good money. And then later I realized how much of a margin we were creating. And I was like, that's how that business got acquired. So wasn't an entrepreneur, but I learned the hard way about value capture.
Yeah. That's interesting. And how did you get into journalism, get into writing?
For me, it was that storytelling is something I've just always really loved to do. And thinking kind of practically, I was like, how can I get paid to do this thing that I think I'm good at and that I enjoy? And writing the great American novel, being a struggling novelist, was not really something I felt cut out to do. There's a line, I think, in the most recent season of White Lotus on HBO where she's like, I'm not made to be poor or something. For me, it wasn't quite that bad, but I definitely am like a slightly risk-averse person, which is funny that now I'm a founder taking on all the risk, because I was sort of thinking very practically, like, where can I just make a living, get paid? I was living at home at first, making nothing. But so magazines actually paid writers. And so I got a job at Fortune magazine. And then tech was an area that I just thought would be growing. I didn't want to do politics. And I was like, tech and politics seem like the areas where there will be a lot happening in the next 10 years. And most tech reporters were in the West Coast. So sort of like, I can cover New York startups. So I was covering, Foursquare, Blue Apron, General Assembly, ZocDoc, all these companies.
That's really cool.
That's kind of how I cut my teeth. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I remember that era of New York tech because I was in college at that time, and I was like shuttling into New York to like hang out and like check in on Foursquare and talk to all my friends that
being
were
the mayor on Foursquare was a big deal.
I know.
Then I kind of got to zoom out and cover startups more nationally. But I think finding a niche and really doing well in it was something I learned from that for sure. Yeah.
And what did you feel or what did you learn in that era of tech, and like why did you decide to like double down covering it?
That's a good question. I think the New York scene was very optimistic, kind of naive, and I think actually like a healthy way for startups. One of the things I learned when I started covering venture capital was a lot of VCs would say, we need a founder to almost have blinders on to not know how difficult and hard this will be. And sometimes, you would talk to a founder who had sold an ad tech company, and they were like, I never want to work in ad tech again because I know how difficult this area is, right? And so I think for me, when I was meeting these founders, like there was a naivete to the nascent New York scene that I actually just found really wholesome, and like everyone was supporting each other. I think now the New York scene is much more sophisticated. But I do think there's a little bit more of that humble or like collaborative vibe versus when I go to Silicon Valley, and I feel like everyone's almost like too optimized and too transactional. So I'd say that was what I loved about the New York scene for sure.
There's definitely room for weirder stuff here, I think, or weird in a different way than like I think there's a lot of amazing stuff going on in San Francisco, obviously, but the shapes of the kind of businesses you run into, there's a lot more non-standard shapes here, which I like.
Well, speaking of weird, one of the most classically non-venture backable businesses is a media company. So how do you end up launching Every 5 years ago?
So basically, like, I sold my last company. I spent a while kind of just like figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I traveled the world. I wrote another novel, which I did not release.
But does your mom have that one as well?
Google Drive has that one. That one didn't make it to my mom. I worked at an incubator. I did some more like angel investing, pre-seed investing. And eventually I was like, fuck it. Like, I'm just going to start another company. I want to start another company. I've always been like a tools for thought, organizing what you know type of like nerd. And so I was like, I want to build software to do that. And it was sort of like inspired by like Rome or Notion. And before I started, I was like, I want to do some customer interviews to understand how really smart people are like organizing themselves to do their work. How do they take notes? How do they do their to-do list? How do they do their emails? All that kind of stuff. So I can figure out how to build the thing I want to build.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed a hack to get interesting people to get on the phone with me. Because if you talk to someone smart and you're like, hey, I'm like building a new product. Can I like interview you about your day? They're like, why would I waste my time with you?
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm going to start a newsletter. And I'm going to say I'm interviewing people for my newsletter. It's going to be called Super Organizers. I'll actually write the interviews up because I really like writing and that'd be really fun. But I'll use what I learned to build software that can then sell to the audience. And so I started doing that and it started growing. And I was like, whoa, like maybe I could just do a newsletter business.
Yeah.
Like I love writing. That'd be super cool. It was at the very beginning of the like creator economy Substack wave, which I didn't know at the time. And so I started talking to my co-founder for Every, Nathan Biches, who was the first employee at Substack. And we started working together. We were both writing our own newsletters and then we decided to bundle them. And that was the sort of like genesis for Every was there's this whole wave of writers who are leaving their publications and that's really good for writers. You can make more money. You have a lot more creative freedom, a lot more control over what you do. But there's a lot of downsides to that. So one is it's like really lonely. Two is there's only a certain kind of writing you can do when you're by yourself because you have to produce a certain amount a week in order to just build your
I
audience.
feel like you're telling me why my job is bad right
Yeah. I've lived it, man.
You're like, you'll feel emotionally drained.
Yeah.
Your name is Alex.
Yeah.
You don't sleep enough.
You
No.
can't take vacations.
But continue. Yeah. Put the nails in my coffin.
And it's also in some ways not as good for readers because you have all these separate places you have to subscribe to. You have to pay multiple subscription prices. And so we were like, what if we could build a publication or a bundle of publications that was a little bit more internet native? So we could figure out an economic scheme to get a bunch of writers together so that readers pay one price and they get access to all the writing that those writers make. But then we also figure out how to share revenue so that as you do better as a writer, you make more. So it solves some of the problems with more traditional like publications that led to a lot of writers wanting to leave. And so that was the original impetus for Every. So we've always had this like writing and like product thing going on where I think a lot of the best writing about business and technology, if you have your hands in the technology and you're building stuff with it, it lets you write from a particular perspective that I really like. And so we've always been building like little products and little things that we've launched to the audience alongside the writing. And that's sort of like blossomed into the thing that we have today. And there's a lot of stuff in between there that did not work and was like completely bad that we've gotten rid of. But that was the idea.
Do you think of Every today more as a media company or a software business where media is, one of the arms of the company?
I usually say media and software company. So the media comes first. Sometimes I say multimodal media company. So it's like software is one of the things we publish. We publish writing, we publish videos, we publish podcasts, and we publish software. Because I think that we're in this era where like what it means to be a writer and what it means to be a builder is sort of like starting to merge a little bit. And I think to me, the soul of what we do is always the media thing and everything comes out of that. So I think the media is the core.
Yeah, obviously you've got this awesome spread in the New York Times, and I was like, I've mentioned to you, I thought it was fascinating. There you are in your glamour photo on the staircase, looking up at all the possibilities.
Yeah.
But I was thinking to myself, okay, a great classic AI investor like Reid Hoffman, what makes him excited about Every? Is it the blend of the two things? Is it really the software tools that you guys will unlock over time? And if we check in years from now, will that mix look radically different than it does today? So I was really curious to hear how you think about that.
So we raised in a sort of weird way where we raised up to $2 million, but we can pull down that money as we want. So we've not pulled down all of it. And I wanted to do that for a very particular reason, which is it's much cheaper to build stuff now. And I care a lot about the kind of business that we build, and I don't want to put pressure on Every to look like a certain kind of outcome. But I do want to have the money to explore. And so we were looking for investors that sort of had that same mindset or were okay with that. So Reed, for example, did not invest out of Greylock. He invested personally.
Mhm.
And I think for him, the core of it is we're very philosophically aligned in the kind of world that we want to build. I think he's thinking a lot about AI and a lot about how to make AI like better for humans. Build a better human world with this new technology. And I think that that's the question that we ask ourselves and think about and try to answer every day in the writing that we do and in the software that we make. And so I think for him, I'm sure he would be delighted if we like 100x his investment or whatever. But I think for him, he's more interested in the impact that we can make on a cultural, philosophical ideas level. And the money is awesome, but not the main thing.
That's great. That's like an intellectual investment,
Yeah.
not just a VC one. And
Yeah.
we know those are not always the same thing.
Yeah.
It's also interesting for me because when I was setting out to start Upstarts, a lot of VCs did reach out. Some wanted to just invest personally, more like Reed,
Yeah.
in whatever I was doing. They didn't almost care what it was. And I do feel like this is also Silicon Valley where
Yeah.
people can be a little transactional, and it's sort of like, I want to show my support for you and what you've done so far. So can I, where do I wire the money?
Yeah.
And you're like, actually just subscribe and, be
Pay
part
me
of the
my
community for
subscription
now.
fee.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want $20K. I want $500,
Yeah.
which of course makes a lot of sense to a VC mind.
Yeah.
It does not. But the other interesting thing was a lot of VCs were like, cool. So how are you building the software tool here? Like, great, Upstarts will be a media company and that's
Yeah.
fantastic. But when do you start the recurring revenue building tools
Yeah.
for other creators?
Yeah.
And it was like they were immediately thinking that must be the goal.
Yeah.
Because if you're ambitious, you want to build a big company. If you want to build a big company, you need software.
Yeah.
You need recurring revenue.
Yeah.
And so for me to say, oh, for now, I actually don't want to do that was kind of like a weird conversation to have.
Yeah, I felt the same way. For many years, everyone was like, so when are you gonna like do something real and not just a newsletter? And yeah, because I think there is like one particular way of being ambitious that most people in tech think about. And I feel very ambitious, but the shape of that ambition is different, and the pace of it may be a bit different. And I think over time, Every has grown into this thing that has a shape that like would be completely unintelligible or illegible if I was like, I want to do this. Like, it's a media company, but we do software and we have a consulting arm, and like it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It's too weird, but it actually just like works in this way that I think breaks the mold of a lot of like typical tech narratives, but also there are a lot of other businesses that work this way. They're just more creator run type businesses, and I've learned over time that has a particular shape, and there's a certain type of person that understands that and wants to build that kind of company. So you're in good company. I know exactly that feeling. How are you thinking about what you want to build and how to go about it?
Yeah, I think for me, the inspirations that are most relevant from a business standpoint are more the bootstrap companies that I've spoken to. And some of these companies go 10 years bootstrapped and then they raise the huge round. And so by the IPO,
Yeah.
maybe they look like a regular tech company, but for 10 years, they were building more modularly.
Yeah.
I think for me, my growth looks more linear and like, direct correlation between time I put in and output I'm getting. I think, so many startups are basically thinking either we're going for product-led growth and we're going to almost, we're going to create that hockey stick with like minimal external effort. We're just focusing on our product. And then of course, they're the startups like Figma, where they spent a couple of years tinkering, losing money, and had to basically be dragged to charging for their product in the first place.
Yeah.
I obviously can't do that, right? Like I can't be 2 years without revenue. And I also think that when you're in media, when you are closer to that creator, and I do think independent journalists are a subset of creator. That is a surprisingly controversial take with some of my peers, but I do believe it.
Yeah.
I think for us, we are the output in some ways. We are closer to that tech-enabled services business than we are the pure software play. And so like MailChimp, I wrote a big story about the MailChimp CEO, and there was a lot of, the story actually went way more viral than I expected because maybe this was also like peak podcasts. And so MailChimp was advertising on every podcast and people knew it that way. But I was like surprised that this guy, Ben Chestnut in Atlanta, got so much attention. I think it was, though, the way he'd built kind of that modular approach really resonated with a lot of folks.
Yeah.
And so that to me is sort of, my thinking is like, do the startup things that don't scale, but also be really close to how the business is performing. Like I get a push alert from Substack when I get a new paid sub.
Yeah.
It's a nice feeling. And it also, like, if I go a couple days without any, it's also a nice reminder too.
Yeah, totally. No, that makes sense. I think I have a slightly different take on the is media or is being a independent writer like a tech-enabled service type thing, in the sense that there's a specific fixed cost that you have to pay in terms of your time to just make a newsletter that anyone wants to subscribe to, but that does not change as you scale. So like Ben Thompson, for example, is probably working the same hours as he did when he was like had 500 subscribers, or maybe the same hours as you, but he makes like $7 million a year or whatever the number is, which I think is a really cool aspect of being a newsletter writer. Is if you can get that formula right, the same output has a much bigger impact in terms of your revenue or your growth when you're like 5 years in or 10 years in, it starts to compound.
And I totally hear that. I think Ben is probably the gold standard. I think Lenny's newsletter, Lenny Rachitsky would be another person. Gurgly Oraz with the Pragmatic Engineer. These guys have all built huge audiences that way. I think for me, I'm a little bit trying to speed run several different products. They're just not software products like maybe you have. So for me, the newsletter is the most important thing. But I want to ship my own podcast in the fall. I've already been doing a bunch of events, and that's where I think it can feel a little more servicey, where I threw an event in New York recently, also in London. And each time you throw an event, there's just a lot of crunchy stuff to deal with.
Totally.
Could I hire to have someone manage that over time? Absolutely. But for now, I don't think it's repeatable. And I'm so much the brand that like, I just have to do those things.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. How has it been going from having a job to being on your own?
Are you saying I don't have a job anymore? No.
You don't have a job. No, as someone who doesn't have a job either, you don't have a job.
I have 5 jobs. None of them pay me any salary right now. So I got to figure that out. It's been an interesting adjustment. I'd say the most positive adjustment for me was to really embrace that sort of founder cliche that you are running your own race. I think that, when I was at Forbes, I am an extremely competitive person. I played hyper-competitive chess growing up until I realized I would not be an adult champion. Chess is a lot like basketball, where, you just end up not tall enough compared to other people. In chess, there was just the processing power where I could see 5-6 moves ahead. And once my peers at the very top started to see 20 moves ahead, I was like, okay, I'm not going to be a chess master. In journalism, though, especially covering VC and startups, I felt like, you know what, actually, I do have room to run to be the best. And I felt so competitive. And so I'd be the person on Slack at 1 a.m. messaging my West Coast colleagues, like, why aren't we on this story? Or like, how did we let Bloomberg get that story? And the minute that I stepped away, it was sort of like that receded, because I realized I'm writing 8 stories a month. I am building a company. I have to like focus on all these other things. I just have to let all that go. Right. And I can be successful building something new in a way that isn't taking away value from somebody else. And so for me, that was the weirdest thing, was like the actual positive sum mindset. I'm curious if you've always felt that too, or
positive sum, like not
like you're adding something versus taking share from Morning Brew,
some other
or someone else.
It's a good question.
I will say the pushback I get to that is that everyone has limited attention. And are we all competing on some level for people's time and attention?
I think I have learned there's a couple things. I've learned over time that for a particular category, people have 1 or 2 slots in their head. And so if you have a chance to own that particular category, like, you got to be at the first or second slot, otherwise you basically don't exist. So I think that like fuels a little bit of competitiveness. Once you find something that's working, you're like, I want to stay there. I think, for example, that's something that Lenny has done incredibly well, is just stayed laser focused on like product type content, and just when you think of product, you think about him.
But he's added like more products. He's supporting other people doing podcasts.
And I think all that is great, but nailing that core allows him to do all the other stuff. I also think, though, that if you're playing from a place of like, I'm just trying to compete with someone else, it's sort of distracting from the actual thing. It's like Tom Brady has a saying, which for some reason, I watched some YouTube with him a long time ago, and it's stuck in my head, which is winners think about winning, losers think about winners. And so the interesting thing about that is the obvious thing to win that everyone's competing for is not necessarily actually the thing that you should be doing. And so focusing only on your competitors actually makes it less likely that you'll win, because you're just gonna go for the obvious thing instead of the and you'll be playing not to lose instead of the actual, like, something actually new that's maybe more valuable that other people can't see.
Well, let's go into all the sports cliches, because I think it was Kobe Bryant who also had some comment around how he hates losing more than he likes winning.
Yeah.
And I do find, like, with a lot of the most successful billionaires or
Yeah.
startup founders that I've met over the years, they have a hard time celebrating their wins because they expect to win. And they are laser focused on whenever anything goes wrong, or they feel like they're not realizing that ambition. How have you balanced that at every, like, have you been able to celebrate wins? Do you feel like you can look back and say, damn, this is a super successful business? Or is it still all the 100 things that you haven't achieved yet? Because I'm very early in that process, and I can tell you I have not found a way to really celebrate or take a breath yet.
I mean, I honestly feel pretty happy day to day. And I do take a lot of time to kind of, like, literally and figuratively smell the roses. Like, it's a special time. And I feel really lucky that I get to run a business where I can feel that way. And also I think just knowing myself that actually I perform better when I'm like that. If I'm just constantly, like, berating myself, which I have done.
Were you always that way, or was there something? What was the moment where maybe you learned how to smell the roses? I'm very invested in learning this.
Therapy, Zoloft, a lot of meditation,
Okay.
a lot of reading, a lot of just. I think, like, I studied philosophy in college because, like, the thing that I wanted to do is, like, learn how to live a good life. And you're never done with that. I'm constantly messing that up. So I'm not trying to say, like, everything's perfect, but I would say the amount of time I spend in the, like, holy shit, nothing is good enough and I need to, like, kill myself in order to make it better, versus, like, I'm actually just, like, super excited to do this thing today because I love it and it's awesome. I'm more in that camp and less in the former camp, but it still happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, it's hard for me because I feel like, with Upstarts, we have all this momentum and I'm so excited by the community's response, but I feel like I need to, like, keep earning it every day.
Yeah.
So I feel just this huge amount of pressure that is sort of self-inflicted.
Yeah.
That is, like, if you actually have product market fit, if people are actually excited for what you're doing, deliver on that, and don't take a break, because you should feel so lucky. Like, so many founders build a product and they were building a solution for a problem that nobody had.
Yeah.
And I think when you actually are building something that it feels like it's resonating, for me, that's just sort of like a double-edged sword where it's like, do more, do more.
I totally agree with you. I have the same thing. Some of that is actually really useful. Like, the urgency that creates and the focus that creates is great. I think I've found for me, there's also this, like, when you feel like you have a little bit of, like, the eye of the world on you and you're like, I'm in the slot, like, I just gotta just do it. At least for me, you can end up playing a little bit tighter. And I've been in those positions enough to know that it always goes away to some degree, but it always comes back. And you want to maximize those opportunities while you can. Like, I think the world and businesses, like, things move in jumps. Like, nothing happens for a while and then it jumps and then you're like, holy shit. And then that sort of goes away. Like, the world only has a certain attention span unless you're a super, super mega celebrity. And so I've started to feel like this is great. I want to do my best to keep this going. And I know it's going to go away, and that's okay because it's going to come back.
Okay. That's really healthy. How do you think about sort of how you can better optimize your time, the products you guys are building, while also not over optimizing and maybe losing that joy or that rose smelling ability?
Well, one thing that we do, we just scheduled it for July, and I try to do it 3 or 4 times a year, but, like, we went from, like, 4 people to, like, 15 in the last, like, 12 months. So
that's exciting.
Our scheduling is, like, crazy right now, but we're doing it in July. It's these things called Think Week, which is Bill Gates famously did Think Weeks at Microsoft. But basically what we do is we don't publish anything new. We publish all archive stuff. On the product side, we try not to have any big releases right before or right after. And it's a week where everyone makes sure to be in that sort of, like, play mode. We often do a retreat together. each day has a theme, but everyone has the explicit directive to get out of the like I need to fight fires mode and into just like what am I inspired by, or like what do I want to read, or what do I want to mess around with. And almost all of our best ideas come out of that period. So I think it's well worth it. I think for me, it's been a really interesting journey to learn how to run a media business, because all of the things that you think you should do, at least in my experience, are the opposite of what you should do. So for example, in a traditional tech startup, you're supposed to build the first version of the product yourself, and then you hire people to like do it, and then you're just managing them and raising the money and all that kind of stuff. And we did that at Every, because that was what we were used to. We started by writing, and then I stopped writing, and we hired people, and we had product market fit, and then we lost it. And I think in a creator-run business, the creator or the voice, you have to protect your time to like do that thing, because that's the thing that you're special at, and you build a team around you to do all the other stuff. So like an example is Mr. Beast. Like, he's still making his videos. He didn't like hire some Mr. Beast Jr. to like do his videos and he's making the chocolate bars. Like, someone else is doing that. And so I realized that like 3 years in, which it took me a while to do that and to admit, like, I just want to be a writer and I'm good at that. And I also want to do the other stuff, but I'm going to hire a team of people to like manage that so that I can be involved, but I also protect my time to do the creative stuff. And things have gone a lot better since then. So I basically spend half my time writing and then half my time operating, and usually around noon is when I switch.
Oh, so you actually have it like calendared out like that? That's amazing.
Yeah, my assistant, no, and that's another big thing, is like just having an assistant. If you're a creator, at least for me, like I just cannot, I'm so bad at like administrative stuff, and I just, having that off my plate, I need it in order to write.
Is this a human assistant or an AI assistant?
A human assistant. Virtual
your
assistant.
online persona feels a little cyborgy, right? You can never fully tell these days what is AI. I think it's great though.
That's by design. Yeah.
Okay, that's by design. So tell me, where is AI changing your workflow, or sort of how you're thinking about what Every ships? Because this is something that people ask me a lot, and so far with Upstarts, I'm still mostly human produced.
Yeah. I mean, everything, it has shifted everything. AI has like really changed everything about like how I work and also how we work as a company. And I know everyone says that or whatever, but like it's for real. So for example, we're like 14, 15 people. We have a daily newsletter, a consulting arm, and we run 3 software products internally.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And not only that, but like, for example, Kieran, who runs Cora, which is our AI email assistant, he shipped 5 features last week and wrote an essay on Every.
Wow.
And
does everyone have to be a writer?
Yeah.
Wow.
Everyone at Every writes.
Yeah.
And almost everyone at Every who's a writer builds stuff. And so I think it really unlocks those small, scrappy teams of generalists to do crazy things where it's like I'm writing and I'm building and I'm making videos and I'm like doing all this stuff, and that A, I just love that, and B, I think you can build a really interesting business if you get enough of those people together. For me personally, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I use AI for, either it's ChatGPT, Claude Code, or one of the apps that we built. So like, I do my email with Cora. It manages my email. That's one of the things that we built. We also have this this app called Spiral, which does a lot of content automation. So the current public version, like it helps you turn, like if you do a podcast, it'll help you like turn that into a tweet, for example.
Yeah.
But we have an internal version that is agentic that has just started to work, because a new like Claude Opus 4 actually like can do the things that we've been asking it to do, and a lot of my tweets now start in there.
Okay.
It's not that I'm not looking at them. It's not like it's going off and just posting a bunch of stuff that I don't know about, but there's a certain amount of time that it takes to like sit down and be like, I have an idea for a tweet. How do I actually get it into a form that is close enough that I can edit it and make it good? And it's a little bit like having a really good ghostwriter that can sit down, talk to you about what it is that you're trying to do, what you're trying to express, and then help you go through different options that you can kind of narrow into something that works and do it really, really quickly. And then I just use ChatGPT and Claude Code all the time. I mean, it's freaking crazy. Just a simple example is just research for stuff that I want to read or write about. Like I'm constantly reading stuff, and then I'll be reading a book, I'll take a picture, and I'll be like, explain this. And ChatGPT like lets me read literature, philosophy, science, like all these things at an incredibly deep level, things I don't have expertise in, and helps me kind of like get there, which is really, really great. But I don't know if you've used Claude Code, but it's this like it's for developers, but it's like this very agentic, you type one thing and it'll like work on your file system and like build a whole feature for you and then be like, it's done. And it can run for like 20 minutes at a time. And I've been using that for writing tasks. Like I'm just a huge Tolstoy guy, and I'm like 75% of the way through War and Peace for the second time in 2 months. Like I've just been on a big Tolstoy kick.
Wow. Okay.
And
a lot of people say they're reading that for years. And
yeah, yeah, it's very good. And I downloaded it. I downloaded a text file. I had it go through. One of the things I had to do is go through a particular scene, both in the original English and the original Russian, and then tell me, okay, like what are the things in the original Russian that I might not have seen in the translation that I'm using.
Wow.
I've had it also, like, one of the things Tolstoy is a real master at is helping you understand what a character is thinking or feeling by describing the concrete actions that they're doing. How are they moving their face? How are they sitting? How do they shift their stance? All that kind of stuff. So I had it go through the first 3 chapters and just pick up like what are all the little descriptors that he uses, the concrete little descriptors he uses, and create a big file of them. So that now if I'm writing a scene like that, I can like use that as a prompt to be like, help me figure out like how to make this character behave so I can show what they're thinking without saying it. Just stuff like that, which seriously up-levels me as like a writer, a thinker, and a human, that would not have been possible 2 years ago.
That's really interesting to me because it sounds like you are really focused on using these tools to deepen your own ultimately human understanding and work.
Yeah.
I think the fear a lot of people have, and I even see this in practice, is that it's a shortcut that becomes tempting to sort of become dependent on.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I was talking to a prominent venture capitalist about my newsletter, and they said that their firm had developed their own little tool. They probably vibe coded it, that would aggregate all the newsletters that the firm's partners subscribe to into sort of one digest every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, I don't have to read Upstarts. I can just read this digest. I don't have to read every whatever. And I was like, that sounds very efficient. Is it fun to read that digest? And he was like, no, it totally sucks. It's like taking a vitamin in the morning. Like it's so dry and boring. And I was like, well, exactly. Like what I'm going for with Upstarts is that you're only getting it twice a week, and it should be fun to read. And that's the struggle for me, is that it feels like some of these tools, if used badly, just increase efficiency at the cost of that joy. Where it's like, I actually am never going to read War and Peace. I want a 10-minute Claude version of War and Peace that feels so convincing that I can then pretend I read it and never read it.
I think that's the thing is like there's this writer Maggie Nelson who says this thing. I think she's paraphrasing someone else. She says there's no tool with no blood on it. Like you can't find a tool that you can't misuse. You can use a knife and stick it in your eye, or you can like cut bread, and
sometimes cutting bread is dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I do.
And so what I hear in that seems like a really good opportunity to improve that digest, or to change how it works so that it actually serves a purpose.
But I don't want them to, in a way, because my feeling personally, selfishly, is that I want the person who is reading Upstarts to enjoy the relationship with me. And I'm really trying to go for this closer relationship with the audience where you can optimize 90% of your day, but for 5 minutes, you're hanging out with Alex.
Yeah.
He's telling you a fun startup story.
Yeah.
And if you aggregated that or had an AI summarize it, you're no longer with Alex.
Yeah.
You're hearing from Alex's friend secondhand what Alex did,
I totally understand that. And I should say, like, I am a little biased because Cora does some of this stuff. So I'm coming from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But my feeling about it, as a writer who writes long things that I want people to read, in general, people have different levels of engagement and levels of attention for different pieces of work and different contexts. Mm-hmm. And you always have to think of your work as a funnel where There's higher up the funnel are the headlines and the tweets and the subject lines and the digest summaries, and lower down the funnel are the people who are like taking notes and like fully sitting down to engage with it. And I think historically, the more top of funnel things that you've had access to are things that are more just like headlines that you had to write yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, having more ways into a piece of work that are a fit for your time and attention is going to be better for writers getting their words out. And so you may like your ultimate goal may be, I want you to come sit down and like have a conversation with me. But that's not actually an appropriate relationship for every person at every time. And it's better for you to like be able to meet someone where they are so you can pull them in.
Yeah, I hear you. I think we're just going to see this across the board with AI where, I think of when I was in college and I had to take statistics.
Yeah.
And I was really busy. I think Arabic was kicking my butt. I was playing rugby. I was like, okay, I have a hack here. We are doing all our problem sets as a group. And like, I don't necessarily have to show up for class.
Yeah.
And so I can kind of hack this stat class and not fully invest in it.
Yeah.
Then the midterm came and I completely bombed the midterm because I realized I had not actually absorbed a single piece of information.
Yeah.
And then I had to go through the painful process of basically catching up in the stats class to have any idea. And I've probably since forgotten all that info, but I had to cram it all.
Yeah.
I just worry that across the board, sometimes we will be in that sort of constant loop of like, okay, actually I was lazy and didn't learn this and now I need to catch up.
So you can definitely misuse it and be lazy. I think basically if you look at the history of technology, it is a history of losing skills. So for example, the first place I always point to is Plato is very suspicious of writing because he was like, it's going to ruin our memories. Because back then you had the poets, you had bards who would remember like the entirety of the Odyssey or the Iliad and recite it from memory. And other people could do that too. Like regular people could do that too. And writing obviated the need to do that. And so he thought it was going to ruin our memories, and it did. But there's a lot of upside as writers. We know there's a lot of upside to being able to write something down and pass it between people. I think you can see the same thing in recorded music, for example. Before recorded music was a thing, music was a social activity that most people could do. Like people could sing and play piano and play guitar with each other because like that's how they bonded and that's how they got together every Sunday or whatever. Mm-hmm. And now, and actually listening to music by yourself was like considered shameful at first because it was like you're not doing the communal thing that it's meant to be. And now, of course, like we're running around all the time, like with our AirPods in, and much fewer people can play music well, right? And so it is always a history of like losing skills. But then I think what we end up doing as a species is using that extra time and extra space to do more interesting things. And the question is that trade-off worth it? And my answer, at least, is it's definitely worth it. But it doesn't mean that there's not a trade-off. Yeah, we do lose some things, but our ability, for example, to engage deeply with pieces of work that we wouldn't have been able to engage with, or do like new projects in subject areas or skills that like we wouldn't have. Like I can make videos, I can make an app, I can like write a poem or whatever. Like AI lets us do that in domains that we're not necessarily as skilled at. I think all that stuff is well worth maybe the chance that I may not engage as much with something that I need to engage with.
If you don't mind, one thing you said that kind of I'm going to take to heart from this conversation is that all these little touch points that are getting the reader to my story or into my story are opportunities to be optimizing or sort of giving them a takeaway that you don't have to sort of buy the whole thing to value. And I think that's hard coming from a traditional media place to fully appreciate, because it's like, why would I tweet my story? To get you to read it. Why do I have a good headline? To get you to read the full story. Why is the first paragraph supposed to be spicy? To get you to read it. But then also journalists are taught to put a spicy kicker. Like often the best quote in the whole story in a classic media article will be at the end as your reward to make it to the end, and also to hope that you at least subconsciously think that, right? If you get to the end of the article and it just sort of ends in a whimper, you're being taught, don't finish the article, right? So that's the background that I come from. And it's very interesting to think like, okay, maybe with my newsletter that's coming out twice a week, it's okay if there's a way to aggregate or take away a few bullet points that is valuable. My wife actually is already telling me, I think you're writing articles that are too long. Like you should embrace the flexibility of maybe a few bullet points are a good takeaway.
Yeah.
But I really come from that mindset. I'm curious, how have you thought about that and sort of developed a thesis around
Yeah,
what's
I
good?
definitely think maybe if you come from a traditional journalism background, or for me, like I come from a more traditional like startup background,
Mhm.
you have a sense of the way things are. You need to hire employees, and then you need to build the first version of your product, and then you need to like stop and hire other people to do it. For example, for me, or if you're in journalism, your article needs to have a kicker.
Mhm.
I think the interesting thing to recognize is that all of those rules or conventions happen in a particular context for a particular reason. And when you leave that context, it's a good idea to reevaluate some of those things. So, for example, when you're getting a newspaper, you're really not competing for attention to read a particular article in the same way that you're competing for attention on Twitter or competing for attention on Substack, because like it's a physical object. And so you may want to in your Substack put the best quote at the top, and you probably do because people are sort of like foraging and scanning. And so I think like for me, the way that I think about it is all of those things, all those techniques are ways to get people to draw people in. And the question is for what? So the core of it has to be, this is something that I just love, like I care about, like I think is important, is my art, it's my craft.
Mhm.
And then around that are all of the kind of negotiable things that you figure out how to do in order to point people into your craft. And if you don't have the thing at the core, then it's like, what am I doing all this for? And you end up with BuzzFeed or whatever,
That's interesting you say that.
Yeah.
One thing that I think about also is Patrick O'Shaughnessy has a popular podcast. And, I asked him a while back, what would be the number one sort of lesson, if I think about launching a podcast?
Yeah.
He said two really funny things that I'll never forget. One was, everyone will say there are too many podcasts. Why are you doing one? And it's true, but most of them suck.
Yeah.
And just believe that yours won't suck.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's a great sort of, breath of fresh air. And then the second one was that at this point in, doing his podcast for years, and I think the acquired guys probably feel this too, they've built this relationship with the audience that the audience is just kind of hanging out with them.
Yeah.
And there's much less variance in listenership from a so-called like huge name, sexy guest versus a relatively unknown person.
Yeah.
That was really instructive for me because with Upstarts, I am really trying to create a similar sense of like, you are part of the community.
Yeah.
You're with Alex for like a story.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's going to always be value for that, where even if I injected AI tools or I optimized takeaways, like at the end of the day, I still want you to feel something
Yeah.
when you're with me.
I feel the exact same way. And I think there's always a difference between what people want and what people need. And what they need is like that sense of connection. What they want is like, what's the latest fundraising round or what's the latest AI tool or
Totally.
whatever. And having both, I think, is really important, because if you only have what they want, then you're just kind of shallow. And like, what's the point? Like, if you're just trying to make money, like there's plenty of ways to make money that are easier than like having a media company.
Mhm.
And if you just have what people need, then you're sort of like, you're Moses up on the mountain and you're like, I'm just, this is my art, and no one, if it's inaccessible, no one, that doesn't bother me, and no one's going to read what you do. So you have to kind of have both.
The want versus need is tough, because also I've already learned that sometimes people will say they want things and it's not actually what their actions back up.
Yeah.
I'm trying to write everything to be trustworthy and fun. So reliable and, using my experience and I think my reputation in the industry, that you say, okay, Alex is going to be fair.
Yeah.
These facts will be checked and as accurate as possible.
Yeah.
He's not going to go off on some crazy tangent, but also fun, where I think a lot of traditional media is very dry, or like these aggregated pieces might give you the bullet points, but you're not going to enjoy yourself. I think it's a loss if someone reads an Upstarts article and doesn't enjoy themselves in any way. But then it's sort of like, okay, from there, will people always want to have fun reading a piece? One of the like weirder pieces that I wrote that I was like, this is a little random, but it's maybe the most fun, didn't perform as well as one of the sort of drier, scoopy stories I wrote. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. A lot of my audience, at least in this moment, wanted that big number acquisition, even though an acquisition is not as fun as a $5 million hologram machine, which I thought was like the cooler thing, you know?
I feel that there's a constant tension with that, and there's a lot of different ways to resolve it. And I think every creator, every writer has a certain place that they fall on the continuum between I do things that I know people will like versus I do things I like.
Mhm.
And for me, I just sort of try to keep an eye on like, okay, one for me, one for you. I know someone's gonna want
The
to
classic
the model,
Hollywood,
yeah, the model
yeah.
review, and then like for example, I have this obsession with like how AI might change science, and I keep writing about it, and no one cares. But like, I'm just like, I'm gonna keep writing about this because like I care about it, and eventually someone will care. You
No,
know?
that's really helpful.
Yeah.
And that makes me feel better because I feel like, just a few months in with Upstarts, I haven't I'm still so reactive to the data
Yeah.
that I don't think I've built that conviction of like, I don't care
Yeah.
that the numbers are bad for this type of article.
Yeah.
I just think you should
Yeah.
read it.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
that's really
ultimately, you have to do some stuff you like.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're just gonna burn out and be like, why am I
I,
even doing
I
this?
I see it as sort of like a Venn diagram where it's like what will drive subscriptions and revenue,
Yeah.
what will create news and sort of like have impact, and then what is just fun for me. And I always want them to be all three.
Yeah.
But I feel like realistically, it's hard to always have all three.
You kind of like lean in different directions, so you have a variety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
One thing that I'd love to learn from you is I think like in 2020 maybe when I started Every, there was a huge wave of people who were like leaving their jobs and starting Substacks. I think that that's not as common anymore. It's still happening, but it's not happening at the same rate. Well, like, why did you decide to leave and start Upstarts?
Yeah, it was really two things. One is it is funny in the context of some of the AI conversation we've been having that in a way it's almost like I trained myself as like a fine tuning on Forbes.
Mm.
And I do think in a way I kind of like cracked the Forbes code. I wrote over 15 cover stories. I ran multiple top lists. I love the team there, and I really was getting a lot out of being there, being one of the more visible tech reporters. But at some point, one factor is just have I sort of mastered this game where now I just sort of, it's like a tech company going public and just switching to profit mode, and how do I maximize dividends for shareholders?
Yeah.
Like I'm not the dividend guy, I'm the growth guy.
Yeah.
And so on some level, it was like, how do I keep trying new things, pushing my comfort zone?
Yeah.
And I think that just writing, cover story 16 or whatever about a tech leader wouldn't have maybe been as exciting and fun and challenging as, when I wrote about Melanie Perkins in 2019 when Canva was small. Like it's hard to just keep finding more Canvas. So that was one piece. But then I think like when I zoom out and I think about media, and this is obviously a very tough time in media where I've had friends get laid off from publications just in the last couple months, and it just feels like it keeps coming, right? I think that for me, there was a sense that we needed more direct storytelling around startups that maybe wouldn't sell at a place like a Forbes. I think like there were a lot of stories that didn't have the huge dollar amount or the technology is too unproven. And I think when you're in a tough time, when you are thinking about, next week's revenue, not a year from now, you get sucked into covering big tech. You get sucked into covering, 5 people on Elon Musk because that's what the reader is paying for today. And I think, what I've always enjoyed is, covering the founder journeys, startups before they're obvious. And I would like work that in, the one for me, one for you as well, where it's like, oh, for every Sequoia story I write, I'll write a story about an emerging manager that nobody's heard of. And Forbes would give me the trust to do that. But I think with Upstarts, it's fun to really be building alongside the founders. The challenge for me is like, can I also now get them to care about really early stage, weird technology? I have freedom to cover the ecosystem as I think is thoughtful and good for the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Will they agree with me on those points?
Yeah. It's a really good question, and I'm really glad you're taking that shot. It is a hard time in media, and I think people feel that, and it's been happening for a long time. But the word media tends to apply to like traditional media organizations. Some of them are doing really well, like the New York Times, and some of them are not. And I think that trend will keep happening because those companies are built for a different time when they played a different role in the ecosystem and they could support different cost structures. But there are people like you who are starting from the ground level to be like, okay, what does it mean to build a media company now? And I think there's actually a lot of opportunity for you to build a new organization if you choose to, if you want to, that has a new cost structure that's fit or that's better fit for the kind of technology and the kind of age we're in now. And I think that's tremendously exciting. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the layoff narrative, which is also important. But it's there's a lot of green shoot stuff that are happening that I think are really cool.
I think, and I think about this a lot with AI too, because it's, one of the trends that I'm covering, or at least watching really closely, is the idea that initially a lot of people are building AI tools to basically automate or improve these human processes that already existed.
Yeah.
I think on the media side, it's like a lot of new media companies are just sort of the new flavor of these processes and approaches to storytelling that already existed. I think, the next Kara Swisher or Sorkin will not look exactly like them.
Yeah.
Like maybe they already exist and they're on TikTok, like who knows? But I think, the leaders of media 10, 20 years from now are being decided today, and they will not look the same. And so if I want to make my bid to have a seat at that table, I have to be experimenting. And I think that's where it's really fun to be a startup, because I found that just building alongside founders with empathy and like in public, you speak a little differently, and I think you get a slightly different flavor of the story.
Yeah.
You probably feel this too, than you do, calling, hey, this is Alex Konrad from Forbes. I'm on a deadline.
Totally. We raised a little bit of money, which we announced last week, and the thing I wrote, the first line of the announcement was, we raised $2 million, which is enough to experiment, but not so much that we have to stop being weird. And I think like that is the sort of core thing, which is if you're trying to do something new and you're existing in this a little bit of a new world, the way to win or be one of those top people in 10 or 20 years is to give yourself the freedom to be a little bit weird, because you're going to have to break some rules and do stuff that people don't understand that looks too small just because you like it, in order to have a chance at that to have a seat at that table. And I think that's what we're doing. It sounds like that's what you're doing, and I'm very excited about that.
I completely agree. I also think like we've mentioned this a couple of times, but like having fun, I think is really important. And if you're not experimenting, hard to be fun. Like if you're only just optimizing what already existed, maybe some people would have OCD and just like enjoy that.
Yeah.
And I will say, if I ever have time to play a video game, I'm the person who tries to like open every single loot box. So I definitely like skew towards that way.
Yeah.
But I think pushing myself to take risks, try things, keeps things fresh. And I really hope that, we continue to embrace that, both of us.
Totally.